What is up guys, this is Luke Hill for Kit Guru, and with DDR5 just around the corner and ready to steal the limelight, we thought it would be a good opportunity for us to look at a variety of different DDR4 kits before they perhaps not sail off into the sunset, but before DDR5, like we said, steals that limelight. So on display here we've got 6 different sets of memory, we've got some mainstream options, some flashy bling options, and some uber high-end options from the likes of Corsair, G.Skill, Predator, Kingston, and PNY. And we'll be testing these memory kits on our AMD Ryzen 9 5950X go-to test platform for memory. But if you are interested in DDR4 performance and how it compares to DDR5 on Intel's upcoming 12th gen platform, let us know in the comment section down below. Maybe we can do a roundup comparing some high-end DDR5 kits to some high-end DDR4 kits. Let us know if you want to see that one. But anyway, that's enough for the brief introduction to this one. Let's take a closer look at the individual kits. Before we do that though, if you like what we do here at Kit Guru, make sure you give us a like and subscribe on the video. That really helps us grow the channel. You can support the channel by becoming a member. And if you want to support us even more, then please do check out the written review on the Kit Guru webpage. That does support us massively. Let's get back into it. So if I start off by clearing some of these memory kits out of the way and making a little bit of space, then the first one we'll take a look at is the Predator Apollo RGB DDR4. Now you probably haven't heard of Predator before, and this parent brand of Predator is Bwin or Bywin, I don't really know how you pronounce that. They're basically a Chinese manufacturer and they've been in business for a decade or so, making memory components like this as well as SSDs. So the Predator Apollo DDR4 RGB kit that we have sampled is pretty impressive in terms of specifications. The 2x16GB kit uses dual rank modules. They are Samsung B-die ICs and the rated frequency is 3600 MHz and the timings are actually 14, 15, 15, 35, and that's using 1.45 volts for XMP. Now in terms of styling, the Predator Apollo RGB DDR4 memory modules use a absolutely massive aluminium heatsink, and this is split into a black zone and also a silver zone, as well as obviously the plastic RGB light diffusion bar. So in terms of height, these are about 51.7 millimeters tall, so they are ludicrously oversized. Don't even bother trying to use these with an air cooler that's going to overhang. You're just going to have headaches. Overkill. Yes, if you like the styling, fine, but certainly overkill in terms of heatsink height. One positive, however, of the sizable heatsink and actual module design is that that plastic light diffusion bar is actually considerably larger in terms of area and volume compared to many of the competing options. So obviously you get the bar along the top with the Predator logo on there, but you also get a lot of vertical space for the LEDs to shine through. So that could be a positive depending on your visual preference. In terms of lighting quality, I feel that the diffuser does a decent job at spreading light from the underlying LEDs, but it's certainly not particularly smooth when it comes to transitioning between the individual diodes. The RGB LEDs are compatible with all of the motherboard vendors' software tools for managing how they operate. In terms of pricing, these are around about $275 at Amazon or Newegg. The price in the UK is pretty much unknown, to be perfectly honest, but we would expect roughly a 1-to-1 as we typically see for computer components, so probably somewhere around about the £275 mark in the UK. But make sure you do check back in the comment section down below and on the written page on Kit Guru so that we can let you know when we get an update on UK pricing. Next up, let's go for the Corsair Vengeance RGB RT kit, and this is basically a brand new set of the incredibly popular Vengeance line of memory from Corsair, and the RT modules were actually released very recently. So here we have the white version. You can get them in black as well if you prefer. In terms of specifications for the kit that we have, this is actually a 4 DIMM set, so it's 32 gigabytes in total, and these are 8 gigabyte modules, and obviously they're single rank modules using Samsung ICs. Now, because obviously you've got 4x1, that's somewhat equivalent, depending on the platform you're using, to a pair of dual rank 16 gigabyte DIMMs. Just the difference being is that you're going to use all 4 slots. The frequency of this kit is 3600 megahertz, but the timings are a little bit loose at 18, 22, 22, 42 at 1.35 volts XMP. Much to our surprise, given the lax rated timings, The modules on our sample are actually supposedly Samsung B-die ICs according to Typhoon Burner. But I'm absolutely not confident in the accuracy of that suggested specification. The timings, performance and tolerance for overclocking do not stack up to B-die levels. Do not be mistaken into thinking that these are B-die level modules. They do not seem to be based on our testing, but I'm more than happy to be proven wrong. One of the other small technical points that I like of these modules is that Corsair has included a temperature sensor, so you do actually get temperature readouts in the likes of IQ or HW Info if you use that for monitoring. That's pretty cool to see. In terms of styling, I would say that Corsair has hit it out of the park once again. These look absolutely fantastic, especially if you're a sucker for the black and white contrast just like myself. The plastic diffuser also does a very good job at smoothing the color transitions within the 10-zone RGB lighting system. And I would say that the LEDs themselves are very bright without being overpowering, thanks again to that diffuser, which is clearly doing a good job. As expected, LED control is managed through Corsair's own IQ ecosystem, and this is a superb implementation at this point in time and has many settings and functions that simply do not exist on competing motherboard vendor suites. At around 45mm tall for the modules, Corsair keeps the height at a very sensible level. These sticks are about the same height as the Vengeance RGB Pro SL sticks and are notably shorter than the original Vengeance RGB Pro modules, and I would say that this continued push for sensible module height and superb aesthetics is a design approach that I really like from Corsair. I have to give them credit. UK pricing for the 4x8GB 3600MHz C18 kit that we've got is about £200 on the Corsair website, though the modules are a little bit cheaper at about £186 on scan at the time of writing this script. The US pricing is around about $210 on Newegg, so certainly very competitively priced for a 32GB 3600MHz kit. Next up, let's take a look at the G.Skill Trident Z Royal Elite. So we actually took a look at the Trident Z Royal RGB memory kit recently, and that was a 4000MHz C17 set of memory that we really did like. But this is the Elite version, so it's a bit more blinged and a bit different in terms of actual module specifications. As you can clearly see from the unboxing, then you not only get the sticks and a sticker, G.Skill includes a nice cloth with the Trident Z Royal naming on there. And that's good to see because these sticks are an absolute fingerprint magnet once you remove the protective plastic that's on there, and actually very well hidden. Last time we saw the silver version, but this time around we get the gold color scheme, and this kit runs at 3600MHz XMP with 1.45 volts, and that's using 14, 14, 14, 34 timings, so really pretty aggressive indeed. And they use Samsung B-die ICs, so that's actually 2x16GB dual rank configuration. And just like we saw from the Corsair Vengeance modules, G.Skill actually includes a temperature sensor here, which once again I do like to see, just for monitoring purposes. You can check out our previous video review for our comments on the G.Skill Trident Z Royal memory styling, but put simply, we think they're absolutely superb. G.Skill has basically nailed it in my opinion. The Elite modules take the aesthetic design up by a notch by swapping out the flat aluminium heat spreader for a ridged design sporting several triangles. The visual appearance is certainly unique, even if the improvements to heat exchange are unlikely to be significant. And of course, that crystalline RGB light diffuser is still present alongside the 8-zone RGB lighting. This helps the Trident Z Royal Elite modules to continue to lead the market in terms of RGB LED quality and styling in our opinions, though Corsair may have something to say with the Capellix equipped Dominator Platinum RGB modules, so it's probably a toss-up between those two, if you ask me. RGB control is via the main motherboard vendor software suites, and you also get Razer Chroma compatibility, and if you want a little bit more control for some reason, you can use G.Skill's own software. At around 44mm tall, then G.Skill's height is once again very sensible. Not only do you get a smart heat spreader and attractive aesthetics, but a market-leading level of RGB light bar is fit inside this 44mm height. So this really does prove that you don't have to go over the top in terms of height to get a fantastic memory module. US pricing for the specific kit that we're looking at, the 32GB version, is about $370 on Newegg. As is typical for G.Skill in the UK, The availability is dire and we have no idea for the pricing because you can't really buy these modules, but we wouldn't be surprised if it's something in the order of 1-to-1 with the dollar pricing, so probably £350 plus. Either way, that's very, very expensive, but you are getting a very tight 3600 megahertz dual rank 32 gig Samsung B-die kit, so we'll have to see if the performance justifies that price. Now let's go for the Kingston Fury Renegade RGB DDR4. So these recently released Fury Renegade RGB modules from Kingston represent the company's latest foray into the high-end memory module market once again. A variety of capacities and specifications are available in RGB and non-RGB form if you prefer. The kit that we have is rated at 3600 MHz speed, and that's 1.35 volts XMP. The timings are 16, 20, 20, 39, and the 32GB set is 2x16GB modules, so therefore they're dual rank DIMMs. The underlying ICs are Hynix DJR, and another useful point is that Kingston includes a backup 3000 MHz C15 XMP setting in case you have issues at 3600 MHz. That's a really smart move. Perhaps not all that relevant for high-end motherboards and CPUs these days, but it's always good to have a backup. Kingston's memory module styling is far less in-your-face or bling compared to some of the competing offerings that we see on the market, especially RGB-equipped ones, and I actually really do appreciate this. I quite like it. The two-tone black and grey aluminium heat spreader is a multi-height design that looks cool without any LED lighting, and Kingston does a very good job at hiding the plastic RGB lighting diffusion bar with the use of the wraparound aluminium heat spreader. In terms of lighting, the consistency and smoothness from the 5-zone LED system is good thanks to that diffusion bar. There are sections where the LED light cannot shine through the wraparound aluminium heat spreaders, but I can see how these may be appreciated by some users as a more industrial style. The LED lighting can be controlled using motherboard vendor software, and you also get Kingston's infrared sync technology by default, which allows the modules to communicate properly with each other. That's cool. If you want more control, you can also use Kingston's Fury CTRL control software, and this is pretty reasonable in terms of actual performance and capabilities. You can manage the 5-zone LEDs, for example. The biggest caveat here is that you have to download it via the Windows Store. So you go directly onto the Kingston website and it takes you to the Windows Store. Seriously? The Windows Store? Come on, just give me the download, Kingston. And at around 42mm tall, the modules are very modestly sized by modern standards, and that's a positive for CPU cooling 8-hour users who still want some RGB memory. UK pricing is around about £200 on Amazon or £152 on the Kingston store. So take your pick there as to which one is legit. The US pricing is around $195 on Newegg, and that makes the Amazon pricing of around £200 in the UK seem a lot more official. But you can seem to buy them at $152 on the Kingston store, so I guess knock yourself out. Next up, we have another set of Kingston Fury Renegade memory, but this time we have modules that focus not on RGB, because they're not RGB modules, but instead on pure ultra performance, coming in at 5.333 gigahertz. Yes, you did hear me correctly. These are 5333 megahertz DDR4 memory modules, and these are using timings of 20, 30, 30, 52 at 1.60 volts for the primary XMP profile. That is insane in terms of voltage. The timings are slack, but that frequency is absolutely ludicrous. And these are 2x8GB modules for a 16GB kit, meaning they are single rank, so you will have some performance loss there, but in terms of raw frequency, these are absolute beasts. The underlying ICs are Hynix DJR, which are clearly overclocked to extremes. This time the backup XMP setting from Kingston is for 4000 MHz, 19, 23, 23, 42 at 1.35 volts, which is a very commendable specification in its own right. In fact, the backup XMP configuration is perhaps more impressive than the main 5.333 GHz version when factoring the balance between frequency, timings, and voltage. Put simply, Kingston appears to have delivered a DDR4 memory kit with DDR5 level specifications, and that could be very cool indeed, if you have the relevant use case and a capable motherboard. Kingston's module styling is practically identical between the RGB and non-RGB set, with the exception of the plastic light diffusion bar, of course. In place of the removed plastic light bar is additional aluminium heatsink that feels solid and should add notable performance to the module's cooling capacity. And that may well be useful given the incredibly high operating voltage of 1.6 volts under high-speed XMP conditions. Module height is still around 42mm tall, so this does indeed appear to be a straight swap of design. RGB light diffusion out, extra aluminium heat spreader in. UK pricing is £475 on the Kingston store, and availability seems very poor elsewhere. In the US, some Newegg third-party sellers have the modules around about $600 or so, but we don't really know how trustworthy that pricing is. Whichever way you cut it, these are obscenely expensive modules to go with their obscenely high frequency rating. Now we'll take a look at PNY's competitor today, and that comes in the form of the XLR8, Accelerate, I see what you did there, Gaming Epic X RGB DDR4 modules. These sticks are available in a really wide variety of capacities and specifications. The one that we have today is 4000 MHz for the frequency, 18, 22, 22, 42 for the timings at 1.35 volts XMP, and the 16GB set is 2x8GB using single rank memory modules. Those timings are actually pretty reasonable for a 4GHz kit, especially when the modest 1.35 volts rating is factored in. The underlying ICs are Hynix based, but we could not validate the exact part number using Typhoon Burner. PNY uses what I would describe as a conventional RGB memory module design. A large plastic light diffusion bar sits on top of a black aluminium heat spreader. The heat spreader is not entirely black, as PNY includes some red colouring for the branding. This feels out of place in my opinion, especially to somebody who may not want red with their build theme. The plastic lighting diffuser aims to smooth the transition between the 5 RGB LEDs, but it's quite clear at first look that the light bar is not doing a good job. The individual LEDs are clearly visible, and there is obvious fade as you move between the zones of each RGB light. This is certainly one of the poorer RGB memory module efforts that I've seen personally, and perhaps indicates that PNY is targeting an aggressive price point for the sticks. These RGB LEDs are compatible with the main motherboard vendor's software for control. At around 48mm tall, albeit in a slanting design, PNY's height is not particularly accommodating for users with air CPU coolers, but it's not the worst we've seen clearly. In fact, the slanting design means that the tallest parts of the modules are at each outer edge. This brings roof-mounted all-in-one liquid coolers and chassis fan interference into the equation. And that, to be perfectly honest, is a bit of a disappointment. UK pricing is very, very aggressive at about £108 on Amazon, and we have actually seen them a bit cheaper than that. Although it is $120 on Amazon, so clearly Amazon has some really good pricing on these sticks. This does look like a bit of a bargain. Anyway, I think that's a close enough look at each of the memory kits that we have on offer today. Let's have a closer look at the test system that we're using. We're testing on the AM4 Zen 3 platform, and this is using a Ryzen 9 5950X overclocked to 4.6 GHz static. The motherboard is an Asus ROG Corsair 8 Hero, and we're using a Gigabyte RTX 3080 Eagle OC graphics card. We've mentioned in previous reviews the headaches associated with testing memory kits of higher than 3600 MHz frequency on the AMD platform. So we've explained this in previous reviews. If you want more details, go and check that out. But basically it means that the PNY 4 GHz kit is going to be running with the latency penalty on the AMD platform for the memory controller out of the box, but we'll also test at 3800 MHz using 1900 fabric, 1900 DRAM clock, and 1900 memory controller clock, so that's quite an optimized setup. However, for the 33 MHz Kingston kit, when we're running beyond 3800 MHz like we took the PNY kit down to, realistically we have no choice but to go to the 2-to-1 divider, so the memory controller is going to be running significantly slower here, and that will give you a latency penalty. Watch out for that. Also with the Kingston kit, you basically will not find an AMD motherboard that will do 33 MHz XMP. These sticks are not on any of the QVLs that we looked at for the high-end motherboards. The best that we could achieve was 4600 MHz on the Asus Corsair 8 Hero motherboard that we're using. So we decided to go for 4600 MHz and use the tighter timings of the backup XMP profile. So that's 20, 23, 23 at 1.6 volts with 4600 MHz frequency, which is actually a pretty aggressive and pretty reasonable set of timings for that 4.6 GHz memory frequency. The caveat here, of course, is that 4.6 GHz memory frequency gives you an actual 2.3 GHz effective clock, which with the 2-to-1 divider gives you 1.15 GHz for the memory controller clock on the AMD CPU, as opposed to 1800 MHz on most of the other kits. So that is going to give you a latency penalty. Just watch out for that in CPU or system heavy workloads, whereas obviously the high memory frequency should benefit memory intensive workloads. But anyway, like always, more details are on the Kickguru website. Now let's jump into the testing. For 7-zip compression workloads, G.Skill's ultra-tight 3600 MHz dual rank kit rules the roost on our AMD test platform. It's tight at the top though, with the slightly looser Predator and Kingston 2x16GB kits also faring very well. Propping up the chart are the single rank 16GB sets. Decompression margins are clearly tighter, and this time frequency does play a role in rankings, as shown by the strong performance from the Kingston set run at 4.6 GHz DRAM frequency. There really is not much to tell apart these kits in Blender. That is due to the sheer level of focus put on the CPU in this tile-based rendering workload. Citybench paints a similar picture, which is unsurprising given that it is also a tile-based rendering workload. There is very little difference between the performance of the 3600 MHz dual rank kits, though G.Skill does fall back a little for some reason. ADA memory bandwidth performance is where the ultra-fast Kingston kit really shows its value. This chart is essentially a pure reading of the kits in terms of combined frequency and timings hierarchy. The Sandra memory bandwidth test does not follow the same rules though. Instead, normal order is resumed and the dual rank kits dominate the chart's upper echelon. The ADA latency test is a bit of a mix between the previous two. This time, we see dual rank kits showing beneficial performance, but memory frequency and timings are also valued. 3D Mark Time Spy does particularly well on the Samsung BDI based G.Skill and Predator kits with the 3600 MHz dual rank operating configurations and tight CL14 timings. Once again, we see the performance segregation between single rank and dual rank sets on the AMD platform. The 32GB 3600 MHz kits steam to the top of our chart in F1 2020. Predator technically leads Kingston by a tiny margin that doesn't show up due to rounding, but realistically, these top 4 kits are practically the same in terms of performance. And as is zero surprise to anybody at this point, the higher density 3600 MHz kits once again take top spot for Watch Dogs Legion. This time, G.Skill is measurably quicker thanks to its tight timings and Samsung BDI ICs. If you can only afford a cheap single rank kit, you won't lose too much performance, but beyond a certain frequency, gaming seems to favour dual rank kits instead on the AMD platform. Overclocking will very much be luck of the draw with the individual kit that you get. As such, we don't really assign too much weight on the results that we see from a sample size of 1 with our test units. But that doesn't stop us from tinkering, so we'll have a quick play about for overclocking. For the PNY kit and the 5333 MHz Kingston set, we've already messed with the settings here, so we're not going to touch those. Instead, we'll be looking at the 32GB 3600 MHz kits to see what they can do in terms of quick and easy overclocking. For the Corsair Vengeance RGB XT set, we managed to push to 3800 MHz memory frequency, and that was using the stock timings of 18, 22, 22. We increased the voltage to 1.45 volts to achieve that. Unfortunately, we couldn't tighten the timings down to something like 18, 18, 18, 38, and that was the case even when using 1.45 volts and 3600 MHz frequency. G.Skill's Trident Z Royal Elite managed to increase the frequency of the memory to 3800 MHz using the stock 14, 14, 14 timings and the stock 1.45 volts voltage, so that's a pretty good result. And the Predator Apollo RGB kit was also able to increase its frequency to 3800 MHz using the stock 1.45 volts that it operates at under XMP conditions, and we managed to maintain the stock timings there, which are 14, 15, 15. Kingston's Fury Renegade RGB set was also able to increase to 3800 MHz, but this time we needed to increase the XMP voltage from 1.35 volts to 1.45 volts. We still did maintain the stock timings of 16, 20, 20, however. To summarise our quick and dirty overclocking then, we saw a little bit of overclocking headroom from each of these kits when running at 1.45 volts. That smidgen of extra frequency capability allowed us to run at 3800 MHz on the 4 samples that we tested, and that's really good because our CPU can do 1900 MHz Infinity Fabric clock, so we can go on the 1-to-1 tie-in. That's a pretty solid result for some quick and easy testing. But of course, as always, your own mileage may vary. There we have it then. that should be a decent summary of the few of the kits that we have in for review on our AMD test platform. The key takeaways that we found really do reaffirm the points that we already anticipated and we kind of knew. Basically, if you want the best out-of-the-box performance from the AMD platform, you want 3600 MHz memory with tight timings, of course, and you want them in a 2x16GB dual rank configuration. That will give you some pretty sweet performance without any of the headaches of messing around with the fabric clock or the memory controller clock out of the box. Just straight XMP, sweet performance. Single rank 16GB kits continue to serve their purpose from a value perspective, as shown by the PNY Accelerate gaming modules. That's especially true if you pick a kit that sticks below around 3800 MHz frequency, so that you do not have to penalize your system by dropping the CPU's memory controller frequency. Throughout testing, we really did struggle to see the mindset for using the uber frequency Kingston Fury Renegade memory kit. This looks to be a set of memory better intended for the Intel platform, or perhaps some specific synthetic benchmarking records, especially as it is DDR4 memory with DDR5 type speeds. So we'll keep an eye on this set for use with Intel's upcoming 12th gen Alder Lake CPUs, as that could deliver an interesting comparison between DDR4 and DDR5 at roughly the same operating frequencies. To close out then, it's good to see a premium memory kit from Predator that actually has the ability to compete with G.Skill's ultra high-end Trident Z Royal type modules in terms of raw performance. That's really cool to see because the G.Skill modules really have offered excellent performance for a long time on the DDR4 market. The G.Skill kit is still the best truly high-end option though from this roundup's participants in our opinion, especially as the overall design is smarter and more relevant. But UK availability continues to be dire and the suggested pricing is incredibly steep based on US numbers. The more reasonably priced Corsair and Kingston 32GB 3600 MHz sets are what we'd lean towards for a more sensible build. The Corsair Vengeance RGB RT kit offers a very well finished product at a sensible price, but the stock timings are loose and this does hurt performance on occasions when combined with the lesser performing Samsung, probably not B-die, memory ICs. Kingston's Fury Renegade RGB impressed us overall. It was really the very fastest set in our chart, but the Hynix-based modules performed well, the operating voltage was sensible, and the RGB implementation is a bit different to many of the competitors, and I quite like that. Couple of strong UK pricing, and this does look like a stellar option. And then last but not least, the PNY Accelerate Gaming Epic X RGB 16GB 4000 MHz kit is simply okay. Performance is okay, aside from the instances where the AMD platform penalizes 4000 MHz memory. The RGB implementation is not very good and certainly leaves a lot to be desired, but the price tag of a little below £110 in the UK is very competitive versus other 4GHz RGB modules. So I guess that's where the value argument lies. So I think that will do. This has been an interesting look at some DDR4 memory kits, their different designs, their different implementations, and how the different configurations perform on the AMD platform. If you want to see something similar to this on the Intel platform and also including DDR5 when it launches very, very soon, then make sure you sound off in the comment section down below. But in the meantime, like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube, support the channel, message us on all the other social media platforms if you want to interact with us. Please do check out the written Kick Guru website, buy a cool t-shirt like this one, and I'll see you next time.